Okay, that's fine. Thank you for inviting me. The fact that you guys heard me speak and still inviting me, I do appreciate that. That's a compliment. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I'm an attorney. Don't throw things at me. I'm going to be a good guy and tell you how to solve some of your problems associated with estate and succession planning. But the most important thing about you guys gathering is the time you spend together. I hope you can pick up a few things from what I say today. But the fact that you guys are getting together, interacting with each other, fellowship, hopefully some of the food's pretty good. And that said, if I say something that offends you, irritates you, or raises a question, shout it out, raise your hand. What you have to say is much more important than anything I can communicate to you. I do hope you pick up some information, but I'm interested in what you have to say, what you guys are seeing back on your farms and so forth. So thank you to the Pence Group for inviting us. I appreciate that. The first thing I want to tell you is there's a tax bill out there. I'm a tax guy, I'm a tax attorney, was a CPA, but there's a tax bill out there that passed just a couple of weeks ago through the House that is called the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act of 2024. That is a mouthful. There's not much in this bill. The title is the most impressive thing about it. So the only three things in there that are really going to affect you as farmers is for you younger farmers that have kids, they are going to try to increase the tax credit a little bit more for your children so that they're worth $2,000 each. Not a big deal for most of us in this room. The 179 deduction, they're trying to adjust some of those numbers for inflation. I didn't memorize any of them. These are not important to me. The biggest thing about this bill is it will re-allow us to use bonus depreciation to 100%. And if you remember last year, we were limited to 80% bonus depreciation. This bill was really interesting because, like I said, it passed the House, it hasn't passed the Senate, and the President hasn't made it law yet. It makes this law retroactive to the beginning of 2023. So notwithstanding the fact that a lot of you guys' tax returns are due tomorrow, and you probably took the 80%, if this bill takes effect and everybody expects it to, that means last year you could have taken 100% bonus depreciation. And instead of 60% being this year, you also get 100%. So you have three options, right? I mean, your tax returns for a lot of you is due tomorrow. You have three options. You can either say, you know what, I can live with the 80%, I got a little other depreciation, I'm filing my tax return. Your other option is, don't file and get a little bit of penalty, determine if that's worthwhile. The option I like best, because I own an accounting and consulting firm, is file your tax return now with the 80%, and then have your accountant amend it, and you pay him again in the summer, taking the 100%, right? Pay your accountant twice. That is the best option. I'm being facetious. Don't do that. Do not do that. Don't pay your accountant twice. I just wanted to let you know that those are the options. Now, if you can convince your accountant to sign off on 100% now before it becomes law, good luck. That's a good accountant, right? If they sign off on that. It should have passed the Senate. It passed the House with flying. It's so bipartisan, it's going to pass. The Senate's playing politics, right? The Republicans want to attach it to a bill that they want to get through, and the Democrats want to attach it to a bill that they want to get through. So they're going to play around for a little bit, but it'll probably get passed sometime in March. And then you're going to have to sit down with your accountant and say, are you happy with your situation? But just know going forward, then you should get the 100% bonus depreciation starting next year again. And that's important because we do a lot of trading of equipment, right? I mean, we all trade a lot of equipment. You need that 100% bonus depreciation. It's important. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I am here to talk about estate and succession planning, and really to make sure you've had probably a pretty good plan in place to grow to the degree you have. You've created a legacy for your family, very important, kind of fun most days. But if you don't have a plan on the backside, how to pass it on to the next generation, I promise you a governmental entity has a plan for you, and it isn't pretty. So make sure you have a plan in place, and we're going to talk some about that. In today's world, our estate tax exemption, and by the way, do you remember the first time you found out that it was an estate tax? Honest to God, as you're growing up, like you get your first job in junior high or high school, and all of a sudden, some guy named FICA's taking half of your pay, right? And you're just like, who is this son of a bitch, I mean, 20, 30, 40%. And your parents inform you that, yes, you have to pay taxes. And just as an aside, there's also state taxes, and maybe a county tax and a city tax. And you're always aware of the sales tax. You've been buying, baseball cards or gum or something, and you've been paying the sales tax. And is there anything left at the end of the day? Oh, by the way, when you die, you also have to pay an estate tax. And so that gets pretty overwhelming. I was in college for a while, you know, taking accounting classes before I even found out about the estate tax system. It's like, okay, this is a really interesting system we have here to tax people. So everybody talks about farmers being, you know, asset rich and cash poor, and there's some benefit to that, because to have cash, you got to pay taxes. But your net worth can grow tax-free until the day you die, and then your heirs have to pay that tax. So in our current system, Mr. Trump gave us a very nice Christmas present in 2017, if you remember. He raised the exemption from $5 million to $10 million per person and put it on an inflation adjuster. So today, that amount is $13.6 million per person. So each person in this room would not have to pay estate tax unless they were worth at least $13.6 million. And if you're married, it's $27.2 million. Do you understand what the government just did there? They put a value on your wife's head. They told you that a spouse is worth $13.6 million. So that feels pretty good. You know, you can look at your wife or your husband and say, hey, you're very valuable to me. And they are. Because you get to. Now here's the bad news. That law is not permanent. And no law is ever permanent. The next administration can always change it. We'll talk a little bit about that. But in order to get that law enacted, because they didn't have enough votes in the Senate to pass it through the filibuster system, they had to put an expiration date on it. And that expiration date is 22 months from now, when by operation of law, it has to go back to $5 million. So that exemption per person will go from $13.6 million back to $5 million. And you smart Alex in the room will probably say, can I amortize my wife then? Can I write that off? Can I depreciate her? And you can't. And the other question I get is, well, how many spouses can I have? Because that's not a bad estate plan. How many spouses can I have? Even in Utah, you can only have one spouse for purposes of federal estate tax. Now, nobody's ever challenged that. If anybody wants to be gutsy and be a guinea pig and say, hey, I'll accumulate some spouses. That's my estate plan. We'll see how many 13.6 millions or 5 millions, whatever it goes back to, we can get. I would love to represent you in court on that. But I can't keep one spouse happy. To me, that would be a terrible estate plan. So I don't recommend that. So we'll talk about maybe some other solutions. But understand that if nobody does anything, this is going back to $5 million. And that's still a pretty good sized number. It's still not a bad number. I mean, $5 million. Now, is anybody in here from Illinois or Minnesota? Because they have their own problems. They have their own state income or estate tax. You're from Illinois? Yeah. So you have a separate problem that I'm going to address, and if I don't, please, remind me. But we'll address it a little bit. So the $5 million it's supposed to take effect on January 1st, 2026. Very easy for the Democrats if they were in control, to just let it roll back. And they've talked about that. We'll just let it roll back. It's the Republicans that caused this problem. We'll let it go back to $5 million. The Republicans realize we're probably going to have to raise taxes because we've given a lot away of free money recently. So there's not a lot of talk right now about actually lowering taxes. And nobody is addressing the estate tax system. Every presidential debate we've had has always, the candidates have a very firm position on how they feel about estate taxes. We're not hearing that right now, which gives us pause for concern, thinking it's just going to be very easy to just let this sunset and it'll go back to $5 million per person on January 1st, 2026. But there's not a politician who can tell you right now with a straight face what it's going to be. They have no idea. A lot of this negotiation gets done at the last minute. Even that 2017 bill was done on December 31st. There's a lot of good parties in D.C. in December after Christmas, and they start drinking, and then all of a sudden they like each other. It's kumbaya time, and all of a sudden stuff gets passed. So these tax bills kind of tend to get passed at the last minute if they're going to get passed at all. Really, really hard to do any planning around that, right? I just told you about a bill that's being retroactive for 15 months. That sounds ridiculous, but that's how your Congress people work. So these people didn't pass kindergarten. They don't know how to get along with each other. And they're really bad at this stuff. The alcohol seems to help for some reason. So we're probably going to have to wait and see what happens, and that's not a very good way to plan for your future. People always ask me, and here comes the history lesson, right? So if you want to fade out a little bit, unless you like history, is how did we get into this system where every administration seems to want to change the estate tax rules? And they do. Every administration since Nixon has changed the estate tax rules. Biden is the only one that hasn't so far, which shocks me. But don't remember, he did try. 2 years ago in 2019, no, 2021, that would be 2 years. In 2021, they did try to pass an appropriation bill to fund some different highway building and different things. It became the infrastructure bill that they passed last year. But in 2021, they tried to pass an appropriation bill, and hidden in there was going to roll back the exemption to $1 million. And it didn't get talked about much. It really didn't, but it was hidden in there that the exemption was going to roll back to $1 million starting at the beginning of 2022. So we'd already be in that world today if it had passed. Joe Manchin was the last vote they needed, and he wouldn't vote for it. So that's what kept it from going back to $1 million. Joe Manchin didn't care about the $1 million exemption. He was upset because President Biden wasn't providing enough money to West Virginia, as if West Virginia really needs any money, right? Ever been to West Virginia? Yeah, exactly. So Joe Manchin got upset, wouldn't pass the bill, and so we didn't roll back to $1 million, and Biden didn't really try that hard. Biden has surprised a lot of us because he hasn't tried to raise taxes, even though we're in an inflationary period, had a lot of debt. He just really hasn't tried to raise taxes. So it's been a little bit of a surprise, his administration, from that point of view. I don't think he'd surprise us again if he won again. I think he would really address raising the taxes. But if the Republicans are being honest, they're not happy with the national debt either. And they've talked about, we're probably going to have to raise taxes. Rand Paul's on record, and he's one of the most conservative Republicans out there. He's on record with saying, I will raise taxes in order to lower the national deficit. Because that really is starting to bother him. So there's going to be pressure for taxes to float back up. That's good news and bad news. Good news for me, because you need me then. You need to come to me, and we'll find a plan. Everybody in this room should be very happy with the income taxes they pay, and the estate tax system is a little different. So I said that the estate tax system has changed with every administration since Nixon. So how did we get into a system where the estate tax system keeps changing with every administration? This country was founded as a revolt against the tax system the British had put on us. So the whole purpose of becoming an independent country was because we were revolting against taxes. We just don't like taxes. Even more so, we're okay with taxes if we have representation. And so our founding fathers really believed in that philosophy. Remember, most of our founding fathers came from Europe, and in Europe there were 10 families that owned all the land, right? Very incestuous. King George and his family were from Germany originally, and they all owned Europe together. So for the average person, unless you were a noble or a king, you couldn't own land. You just couldn't. You had to hunt on the king's property, and if you found out, he usually hung you or made you be part of the hunt, and he'd shoot you. So a lot of our founding fathers came over here thinking, we don't want that system anymore. We don't want that for the United States. We want a meritocracy. You have to earn your keep. And so even in the early documents, the Federalist Papers, you want to snooze or read those, right? Read the Federalist Papers some night. You won't get very far. But in those papers, James Madison, Monroe, Hayes, Jay, and Hamilton talked a lot about having some kind of inheritance tax so that 10 families wouldn't end up owning the entire United States. Not that we even knew how big the United States was back then, but they wanted some kind of inheritance tax system so that we didn't become a European system. It was really hard to define what that would look like. Remember, this is just a little bit before computers, so there was no way of tracking what people really owned. And a lot of property was movable, right? In the South, a lot of people's net worth was built up in slaves and so forth. So it was really hard to track how you would put an inheritance system in place when nobody could put a value or even understand what assets you had other than maybe land. Land was easier to certainly inventory and put a value on, but there was a lot of movable property. And people that built up net worths in, say, like North Carolina would then move into Tennessee and then move into Kentucky, and so it was very movable. So the government had no way of really tracking how to develop an inheritance tax system back then. And so it didn't get put in place. We had other issues to deal with as a young country, so nothing happened until the Civil War. And remember, the tax system for every country and state back then was a tariff, right? You read about this when you were in school. You crossed any jurisdiction, whether it's a state line, a country line, a county line, a city line, you paid a tax to bring your good in. That was how all countries functioned, all states functioned. It was a tariff system. You paid a tariff to move your property into the next jurisdiction. Well, that was not going to fund the Civil War, at least not the Union's portion of it. So Mr. Lincoln, President Lincoln, created the first income and estate tax system in 1962. 1862. See, you guys are paying attention. Yeah, exactly. 1862. And he taxed about 20 families, because those are the only people that were really, really wealthy in the North. And it funded the Civil War. It did. And if you haven't heard, the North won. So that's what happened there. But those 20 families finally sued, and the Supreme Court said that taxing system was unconstitutional. It was very biased towards wealthy people. Who would have thought we could discriminate against wealthy people, right? But that's what the Supreme Court ruled. It was biased and discriminated against wealthy families. So it was overturned. And now Mr. Lincoln sadly wasn't around anymore to fight it, and so it just kind of went under the road, and we got on with Reconstruction in the South, a little bit of manifest destiny taking over the West, and nobody really addressed the income or estate tax system again. We went back to a tariff system until Teddy Roosevelt, who was very progressive for a Republican. He was the first Republican president since Lincoln, or any president, to introduce not only estate taxes, and inheritance taxes as one, income taxes, and he also was the first president to recommend a national health care system. Yes, a lot of old people. So we had a high death rate of birth back then. A lot of old people just dying in the streets in the early 19th century, 1900s, I'm sorry. And so Teddy was very progressive, wanted to develop income tax, estate tax, and a national health care system. The Supreme Court found all three of them unconstitutional, and he didn't have enough votes in the Congress anyway, so they didn't go anywhere until President Wilson became into office. And he started dithering in that world just a little bit, and then World War I started. And he needed a very, very expensive war. And part of the reason we entered into World War I was the tariff system wasn't working. Countries were getting pretty upset that we were, high tariffs on countries we didn't want to deal with, low tariffs on countries we did. It was very discriminatory. All countries were doing it. Trade was dying across the world. And so administrations in all countries started thinking, we need to come up with a better system here. And so President Wilson introduced an income tax system and an estate tax system that the Supreme Court allowed to go through. Much more liberal Supreme Court at that time needed the funds to pay for World War I, and so they allowed the income and estate tax system to come online. And that is the system we live in now. The 1916 legislation that created the income and estate tax system is the current system we live in. It really hasn't changed much. It's been challenged a lot. I'm sure people in this room have heard that our income tax system is voluntary, right? And it was back then. There was no W-2s, there were no 1099s, there was no filing requirements. You literally had to raise your hand to pay taxes. If you didn't, people like Al Capone went to jail, right? I mean, that's how they scared you into paying taxes. No reporting oversight at all. The IRS really wasn't established. There was a Treasury Department that was established in the 20s, and that they went after gangsters. They started using some laws that put gangsters in jail, and they were doing it because they weren't paying their taxes. I mean, yeah, it was okay to shoot people in the streets and, run illegal liquor, but damn it, you better not pay your taxes, right? You're going to jail. So, so they started putting people in jail, but it was truly a voluntary system. You had to raise your hand and say, hey, I made this much money a year, and I'm going to pay taxes on it. None of your forefathers were paying taxes, right? None of them were raising their hands. Our income tax system is not voluntary anymore. And if you want to challenge that, go right ahead. But you better look good in an orange jumpsuit, because you're going to be out there picking up garbage on the side of the road. They will come and find you. Our estate tax system is much more voluntary. And what I mean by that is, again, you do have to self-report. When you pass away, your heirs have to raise their hand and say, Mom or Dad died with this amount of money. The IRS knows they died because you have to file a final return for them, final income tax return, say, when they passed away. So the IRS is on notice that your parents have passed away or grandparents. But you literally have to raise your hand and say, this is their asset base. And this is what we're reporting as values, and if we do or don't owe taxes. As you can imagine, not a lot of people were raising their hand and doing that. Again, I didn't find out we even had an estate tax system until I was in school for 3 or 4 years. So most people weren't even aware that this system existed, right? So we get on with World War II. Countries have gotten away from tariffs, and they've gone, almost all countries went to an income tax and an inheritance tax system, including our own. And during World War II was when President Roosevelt really introduced in his Treasury Secretary the W-2, W-4, 1099 reporting requirements. And so all of a sudden it wasn't so voluntary anymore because the IRS knew your business. And they know all of your business now because when you file a tax return, you pretty much tell them everything about yourself. Height, weight, sexual predeterminations. I mean, you have to put everything on your tax returns today. And they're trying to even get more into your business. So that's not changing anytime soon, right? It's just we're having to file and disclose things that we wouldn't tell our spouses exist in our lives. So there's a lot of reporting done, and so the IRS is well aware of your income for the most part based upon what's being filed, and they also know probably what asset base you have, because most of your entities, if you have any, have to file balance sheets saying how much your assets are worth, and they can always pull your deeds and stuff like that. But anyway, when we created that system in 1916, the estate tax system, they made the exemption $50,000 per person. And how they got there was the average household income was a little over $4,000 back then. And so, in their infinite wisdom, the Treasury just multiplied by 12 and came up with $50,000. So, $50,000 per person, that was the estate tax exemption back in 1916. And it stayed $50,000 per person for the next 60 years until 1976. $50,000. You gotta be sitting there going, everybody was paying estate tax, right? I might even have that in my pocket here, $50,000. I don't know. Nobody was paying estate tax. You know why? There was no gift system. So when you passed away, you called your local minister or priest, confessed all your sins, and then you called your accountant or attorney and gave away all your assets. And as long as you gave away your assets before you died, some places you could do it after you died, we'll take that signature, you didn't pay estate tax. So again, most people didn't even know we had an estate tax system. The wealthier ones just gave things, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, they just gave all their assets away, right before, right during they were dying, Don't give him the morphine until he gives away his assets kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it was a bartering system. And so that's what everybody did until 1976. And then Gerald Ford, on his way out of office, I don't think for spite, but he wasn't happy that Carter was coming in, he created the gift tax system. He married the gift tax system to the estate tax system. And what I mean by that is, again, during your lifetime, you can either give it away or die with it, or some combination. But you don't get the double dip, right? You can't give away $50,000 and then die with $50,000. It was a married system. They were married to each other, the gift and estate tax system. They were unified, is the word we use. And as a little present, going away present, Mr. Ford raised the exemption from $50,000 to $100,000. So now you got a $100,000 exemption, 1976. We're in a bad recession. Remember that stagflation nonsense we were in the 70s? So again, not a lot of net worth. We're getting ready to enter into high interest rates, farms going south. But as Mr. Reagan became president, the stock market took off. And he was getting a lot of pressure from Wall Street to raise the exemption. So throughout the 80s, during Reagan's term, you saw that exemption climb. So by the time Bush and Clinton took office, it had risen to about $650,000. So during the 90s, if you had a grandparent or parent die in the 90s, it kind of fluctuated and then solidified at about $650,000 during the 90s. Again, if your grandparents passed away, you had $1.3 million, which was usually enough. Iowa land was still going pretty high back then, so what a lot of people did to avoid estate tax, because again, I didn't have a lot of clients paying estate tax, but we had two tools that were available to us back in the 90s. Mr. Clinton put into effect under the estate tax system. And that was you could make an election to use special purpose, special use valuation on your land. If anybody remembers that, you can make an election to say, I don't have to value my farm at its highest and best use. I can use something much different. I can make up that there's going to be an easement on it and value it as something a lot less. And that code section allowed us to do it, and a lot of people took advantage of that. And then there was also a statute that allowed you to make a qualified family-owned business interest deduction. And basically what that said is you get another deduction. So if it was $650, you got another $650. But what you were basically saying is, and somebody from my father, if that's who passed away, one of his blood relatives will stay on the farm for the next 10 years and farm. Not a hard decision to make. I mean, a lot of us made that decision. What we didn't realize when we made that decision in order not to pay estate tax was what you were basically saying to the IRS is, oh, and by the way, put a lien on all my property, please. It didn't say that in the statute, but that's what they did. If you made that election, what they basically said is, well, now you have to stay back there and farm for 10 years, and to make sure you do that, we're just going to put a lien on everything for the next 10 years. And so here's how people found out about it. They went to do a like-kind exchange, or maybe to do a mortgage, to use their land as collateral, and they went down to the bank, and the bank was like, somebody named, because it didn't say the IRS, it was just some agent's name, has a lien on your property. So you call your accountant attorney and say, why does somebody have a lien on my property? Oh yeah, you made an election, or your dad made an election when he passed away, to use either special use valuation or qualified family business use, and the IRS gave them the permission to put a lien on your property for the next 10 years. So, as a firm, we didn't use that strategy because it pissed people off, right? To find out they had a lien on their property. Good luck finding that agent to remove that lien, by the way. You know, they don't work for the IRS anymore. You know, nobody stays with the IRS. It's like kindergarten. It's a learning level place. And then you graduate to first grade and move on and get on with life. So those agents don't stick around very long. It takes a while to even figure out it was an IRS agent, and good luck finding it. So it would take a year to get that lien removed. Meantime, your like-kind exchange is come and gone, right? So it was very frustrating, and as a firm, we didn't use that tool much. End of the 90s, all of a sudden, Mr. Bush starts, and the Republican Senate started this first. Newt Gingrich, I think, was the originator of this. We decided it wasn't estate taxes anymore. If you were around in the late 90s, it all of a sudden became death taxes, right? It was like Darth Vader. It's not a good name. This has to be a bad thing. So who wants to pay death taxes? Nobody. It has to be a bad thing. Let's get rid of it. Get rid of death taxes. Nobody wants death taxes. And so that's what he ran on. I mean, if you remember the debates in 2000 with Gore, he talked a lot about getting rid of death taxes. This country should not have death taxes. It's not American. It's communist. That was another big thing. That's a communist system. Quite honestly, every system has inheritance or estate taxes. We were the only one. We're the only country that even talks about getting away with, doing away with it. So big push to do away with them. He didn't have the votes. Again, in the Senate, you need 60 votes in order to avoid filibuster and pass something. The House, you just need majority by 1. But in the Senate, to make something a permanent tax bill, you need to get past the filibuster, which is 60 votes. Didn't have it. And then in 2005, there was an independent senator from Vermont, of all places, the live free or die state, right? That finally said, you know what? If you guys really, really want to do away with the estate tax system that badly, I'll vote with you. I'll vote with you. I'll be the 60th vote. You guys can eliminate the estate tax forever. And that was the last week of August 2005. Anybody remember what happened that weekend? Katrina came through New Orleans. And the Bush administration looked at each other and said, I bet we're going to have to pay for that. And they never even brought it to the floor. Never got voted on. Never got voted on. Because we're still cleaning up New Orleans. If you've been there, you know it's still being, and it will always be in a state of being cleaned up, right? I mean, it's not built in the best. It's built below water level. It's going to flood. So, and since Katrina, we've had more hurricanes, more tornadoes. FEMA's so overfunded. FEMA is funded with your estate taxes. The estate tax system is supposed to go away. It's now funded FEMA. So good luck. The Republicans really don't talk about repealing estate taxes anymore. And don't get too excited about that plan, even if they do, because the next administration, like I said, can always bring it back. No tax rule is ever permanent, no matter what anybody says to you. The next administration can always change the rules. And they have, as I just said. So then comes in Obama, right? So if you remember during the early 2000s, under Bush 43, the rates the estate tax exemption just kept going up and up and up. Finally got to $3.5 million just as Mr. Obama was coming into office. And you're not going to like the statement, but he's not the only president that really understood our estate tax system. Because he did a couple of things then. He ran on the platform of, why isn't the exemption $1 million? Because if the average household income in 2008 when he ran was about $60,000 back then, 60,000 times 12, if you go back to the original mythology of how our estate tax system exemption came into place, it was 12 times the average household income. 12 times 60 is 720, so $720,000 should have been the exemption under that model. He was going to be generous and say, let's make it an even million. And he's not wrong in his philosophy on that. And so he kind of ran on that. The Republicans clearly weren't repealing the estate tax system. And so as he came into office, again, under Bush 43, when that estate tax exemption was changing every year, that was a sunset provision too. Again, didn't have the 60 votes in the Senate, so it had to sunset in 2010. So if anybody remembers in here, at the end of 2009, as Obama was talking about moving the exemption back to $1 million, your accountant and attorney were telling you it is going back to $1 million because the sunset provision, when Bush put this in place in 2002, said it had to go back to $1 million. Again, all those increases were temporary. The original rule back in 2000, when Bush came into office, was at $1 million at that point in time. Clinton had done that as he left office. He raised it from $650 to $1 million. That was the law. What Bush put in place was temporary. So there was a lot of accountants and attorneys telling you guys, start giving crap away, man. You got to get it out of your name because this is going back to $1 million. Remember what happened instead, though? 2010? That is the year you should have done your succession plan because Obama just let it expire. There was no estate tax for 1 year in 2010, and every single one of you in this room should have done the best succession planning you could have done and died, and none of you did. That was the year to die. Remember, that was the year Steinbrenner died on December 31st, because he didn't have a plan in place, and his family was going to have to sell the Agnes. And I'm sure one of those kids, Hal, tripped over the cord, plugging him into that life support, and his dad expired. There's 2 other billionaires that died that same week because they didn't have estate plans either. So, it was a good time to die. But again, nobody in this room took that as their succession plan, and maybe that was a good thing. We'll see. We'll see. So, that was the year to die. Mr. Obama then decided that year, as he was trying to pass his legislation, which was Obamacare. Remember all that? Hard to believe that was 14 years ago. But, again, this ended after Christmas, the congressional parties, they're finally in first grade. They're not in kindergarten. They've passed kindergarten. They're starting to compromise and negotiate, right? And so the Republicans are like, we want a much bigger exemption. And Obama's like, yeah, I'm not going to give you unlimited. But what Obama wanted was, don't vote against my Obamacare, against the health care. I don't need your votes. He had the 60 votes he needed. But don't vote against it. I don't want this to be an open debate. I don't want filibuster. So I will raise the exemption, the estate tax exemption, to $5 million. Unheard of. We were shocked. Why did he do this? Because he didn't want them to filibuster his Obamacare. He wanted that to become legislation. So they had an agreement. I don't know who shook hands, I'll be honest with you. But January 1st, January 2nd, we find out the estate tax, 2011, we find out the estate tax exemption went to $5 million per person. I thought it was hungover. I'm like, that can't be right. Am I still drunk? $5 million. But the agreement he had was, don't fight my Obamacare. So it became into law. The next week, the Attorney General for South Carolina filed a lawsuit saying Obamacare is unconstitutional. And the week after that, the North Carolina Attorney General did the same. And Mr. Obama was not happy. So, in his budget that year, he said, I'm taking it back to $1 million. And everybody got up in arms again. And he said, okay, I'll take it back to $3.5 million. So that was his budget for 2012. Because 2011 is already in place. So for 2012, he's going to take the estate tax exemption back to $3.5 million. Please don't try to remember all these numbers, by the way. This is just to tell you how screwed up our system is. It's a political football. By 2012, he had lost the Senate, didn't have the 60 votes anymore, and so we couldn't get it passed. He didn't want to use the temporary method to put law in place, so he was just going to wait until he ran again in 2012 and try to win the House and Senate and be able to make it permanent and go back to $3.5 million. And he didn't win enough votes. I mean, he was reelected, obviously, but he didn't control the House and Senate enough to get his legislation passed. So we were left with the $5 million under Obama the entire time, right? So from 2011 until he came out of office at the beginning of 2017, we stayed at $5 million. But the one thing Mr. Obama, he couldn't get that passed, but the one thing he understood was how wealthy people were avoiding estate tax. I say all the time, wealthy people in this country do not pay estate tax. They do not. There's too many loopholes. Uneducated people in this country pay estate tax, not wealthy people. There's too many loopholes in the system. When President Trump's father died, Fred, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times printed his estate plan on the front page of the paper. And it's some of the things we're going to talk about today. Because they're legal. The tax courts have ruled on these, and you're allowed to do it. And Mr. Obama realized that, because this was back before Fred died. But he realized people are using certain tools and strategies to avoid estate tax. One is the discounting, right? We're all aware of that. If you use the right kind of entity, LLC, C Corp, S Corp, whatever it is, and put some restrictions in your agreement, you can start discounting your asset base, right? So you put your land in an entity of some sort under state law, and if you have the right restrictions and operating agreement in place, you can start discounting your land by 30, 40, 50%, right? And at the end, back in the 90s, before the tax courts really ruled on this, I was pretty creative because I started my career trying to salvage family farms, and that's not a lot of fun being on the back end of that. We lost our family farm in Western Pennsylvania many years ago when none of my grandfather's kids wanted to farm. But it was the meeting place of the family. That's where we all kind of met. I have 25 cousins, first cousins, and when he sold that farm in '72, I don't think I've ever been together with any of my cousins since then. Maybe for a death, right? Not even, probably a funeral, that's it. Not even for a marriage. So we don't get together anymore because the family farm's gone. So, I spent those first 10 years really fighting to try to keep family farms together. They were coming apart because of an untimely death. Somebody had to write a big bill to the IRS or a jurisdiction, or a lawsuit or a divorce, right? And somebody was taking part of the land and going off on their own. And so I finally said about 15 years ago, I got to get in front of this. I got to go around speaking about solutions to this. And so that's kind of why I'm here, is there are solutions to this. There's ways to make sure this doesn't happen. Because if you don't have this plan, if you don't have some way of holding your succession together, you guys have done a great job of growing it, inheriting it. A lot of third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation people in here probably done a great job. But these aren't family farms. These aren't small family businesses anymore. These are big businesses. Land values, try starting to farm now, right? Can you afford to go out there and buy 1,000 acres? Heck no. You guys have created this legacy that no other generation is going to ever be able to build again. So why would you not have a plan to keep it together? I meet with people that are in states that have their own inheritance tax, estate tax, there's about 8 of them, and the next generation is like, why would I come back to the family farm? I'm going to have to sell half of it in order to pay the state and federal estate tax. Why would I want to come back to that situation? And there's a solution to that, right? There is. And some of it is that discount, being able to put it in an entity and then discount it a pretty good percentage. In the late 90s, like I was saying before the tax courts ruled on this, I got pretty creative and I started putting land in an entity that was owned by another entity that was owned by another entity. You see the game I'm playing here, I'd take a 90% discount when somebody died, right? Because each one had their own restrictions. Well, the tax court finally said to me, you're not doing that anymore. We'll allow one, and Congress made a legislation. They said you can get one bite at this, one bite at discounting. You can't do it if you layer things. Again, Mr. Obama realized this game was being played, so in 2015 and 16, because he couldn't get it passed through Congress, he had his Treasury draft a regulation that said this: if the family owns all of the assets, I don't care what entity it's in, no more discounting. Because the family's controlling this thing, so no more discounting. And the attorneys started saying to people like you, well, then bring in a charity at 1%, right? So you have this LLC with your land in it or whatever asset base, just bring in a charity at 1%. Terrible idea. Does a charity want to own 1% of your land entity? No, they want cash. They're going to sell it right back to you for cash. Or they're going to try to sell it to somebody. And so you're back in the same place, or you have another owner you don't want. You don't ever want a charity to be part of your entity. So that regulation that he drafted, though, it was only a proposed regulation. And as he was leaving office, Hillary Clinton was saying in 2016, yeah, I'm going to make this permanent. This is going to become a new regulation. And so again, a lot of attorneys, accountants were up in arms about what are we going to do? How are we going to plan around this? Well, in hindsight, Hillary Clinton didn't win the election, did she? So that proposed regulation is still a proposed regulation. Mr. Trump did not withdraw it. It's still out there. It's still proposed. I don't know why Mr. Biden hasn't done anything with it. I really don't. But it's still just a proposed regulation. It is going to get passed at some point. These are games we're playing, right? And the family still owns all the land. I stick it in an entity and discount it 40%. That's a game. So it'll get, that loophole will get closed at some point, which will open another loophole. I'm always one step ahead of the IRS, by the way. So that's not a problem for me. But that loophole will probably get closed. So what I'm saying is, can we lock that loophole in today, knowing it may be gone in the future? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. The other strategy that Mr. Obama recognized was that there are certain trusts out there that were not paying any estate or income taxes. So, in general, there's only two types of trust, right? A revocable trust, which everybody in this room should have. So, when you get started in life, you need a will. Everybody should have had a will when they started in life. If you have young kids, minor kids, you should have a will. Because what a will does is it tells the court who should raise your kids. And I don't care how good you think your kids are, nobody else wants to raise your kids. You've ruined them. They're browns, right? Even grandma and grandpa really don't want to spend 24/7 with it. So the will is telling who gets stuff raising your kids, right? And so that's very important. But as your kids become of age and majority and they're no longer minors, the will doesn't have any value anymore. What you need then is a revocable trust. Because what a revocable trust does is it avoid probate, which is very important, right? You put stuff in a revocable trust, that revocable trust is an entity while you're alive. It doesn't file a tax return, everything flows to you, it's just you. But the state's recognized as an entity. A will is not recognized as an entity. You cannot avoid probate with a will. If you don't take anything else home from that, you cannot avoid probate with a will. A will has to be probated. Probate, depending on how sophisticated your farm is, can take 6 months to a year, right? Not too bad. And attorneys in almost all states can charge 1 to 2%. So again, roughly if you're worth $10 million, they can charge your family $100,000 to go through probate. They can charge $200,000. All states say 1 to 2%. And that's nice. Remember, you've seen the billboards. The personal injury attorneys, what are they charging? A third. So before these rules were put in place, probate attorneys would charge some families a third. Yeah. And probate's not difficult. What it is public. Everybody knows your business. It has to be published in a local newspaper. And so it's out there for all to see. So that is the main reason we want to avoid probate. It takes longer, so it irritates your kids. And especially if somebody needs to be running the farm, who's running the farm if it's in probate? They assign a trustee to run your farm, right? So you need to have a revocable trust. It is what it says it is. It's revocable. You can change it every day. If your kids irritate you, write them out of it, write them back in the next day. You can play games with your kids. It's kind of fun, actually. So have a revocable trust so that you can tell the courts, we don't need you to move on to the next generation. We can successfully go to the next generation without your input, without your expense, without your delay. We're going to keep everything private because this document lays out how my bills get paid, who runs the farm, who's the landlord, how income is distributed. It gets as detailed as you want it to. Right? So you need a revocable trust. The other type of trust is irrevocable. And if I put any of you, because you're all a bunch of control freaks, if I put you in an irrevocable trust, you would probably pitchfork me out the door, right? Because an irrevocable trust is what it is. It is irrevocable. You can't control it anymore, and you don't have access to the cash flow. So nobody in this room should be in an irrevocable trust. If one of your parents or grandparents passed away, you may be the beneficiary of an irrevocable trust. You can't do anything about that. That's fine. That's just the way it is. They were trying to do some estate planning when they did that, and that's fine. That's not a bad plan. But you don't want to create an irrevocable trust because you have to give up control and cash flow. All right. In a revocable trust, all the assets in there are still in your estate for estate and gift tax purposes. In an irrevocable trust, they're not. What you really, really need is something in between, a hybrid, something you can control, something you can keep the cash flow. But you need the assets out of your estate for estate tax planning, right? You need that in-between trust. And the only reason I'm here is because there is an in-between trust. It would be pretty sad if I said, I wish that thing existed. It does. It does. An ex-IRS agent created it for the Rockefeller family in 1979, and the tax courts upheld it. It's called an intentionally defective irrevocable trust. We call it an idiot, for sure. And there's many, you can Google, it's been around for 40-some years now. And this is how it works. Is the assets in there are still yours for income tax purposes, meaning you can control them, it's set up the right way, and you still get the cash flow, which means you pay the tax on them just like today. But for estate and gift tax purposes, they're not in your estate. So it's the best, and that's what wealthy people do. They put assets in this type of trust and let them grow. The Rockefellers are worth, it's been estimated, almost $1 trillion because no generation is paying estate tax. Yeah. Now, if you want to raise your hand and pay estate tax, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But this is how you really create a legacy. If every generation is paying estate tax, there is no 5th or 6th generation of farming, right? Once they start selling land, that's a slippery slope. The local real estate agent will convince them to sell everything because now's a good time to sell. and you really want to farm half of what your dad did. So again, you built this to keep it together. This type of trust allows that to go on. It will not be around forever. So we're going to talk about strategy and how to make sure that will still be in place for you. So again, Mr. Obama tried to do away with these trusts, didn't have the legislation. Mr. Biden in 2021, in his legislation that nobody read, because it was an appropriation bill, also did away with these trusts. Both Mr. Obama and Mr. Biden's attorney generals came out and said, that's fine, you can do away with these trusts, but if there's a contract associated with these trusts, they have to be grandfathered in. You can do away with all the ones going forward or all the ones that only have gifts in them. But if there's a contract, and I'll explain that in a minute, you can't do away with these trusts. And so in the legislation it said, okay, going forward, no more using these trusts. And again, at some point that will get passed, and I'll have to create something else, right? I don't want to have to work that hard. I'm getting old, so let's use these trusts while they're available. So this is what we do. So 99% of the people in this room, you're all ad people. The most important thing you can do to keep family harmony, because more than paying estate tax, you want to keep family harmony, right? I mean, that is the biggest goal. I'm usually talking to the moms at this point in time, right? Please let them spend Christmas and Thanksgiving together, you know? Yeah, do whatever you have to so that we have family harmony. So, what you do, look, all of you, for a perfect succession plan, should have just had one child that really loved what you're doing. Perfect succession plan. One kid that really likes what you do, that you're done. That's the best plan ever. And then you guys went on and had more kids because that one either slept or said goo goo gaga or daddy to you. You're like, oh, let's do more of these. Yeah, right. So you had more kids, and at some point you looked at your wife and said, are they both mine? Are they all mine? Because they're so different, right? They may get along, but if you die and all your assets are in one pile, whether that's personally in an entity, and that's how you leave them to your kids equally, they're going to fight the rest of their life. Because somebody's leaving the farm. And now, the on-farm heir has to ask permission from the off-farm heir, who's married a moron probably, you know, that's probably going to say something like this, wait, your brother, who just marketed the grain really poorly and lost us a lot of money, wants to buy $1 million combine, and we haven't been on vacation in 5 years? Yeah, don't let him buy the combine. So that's the conversation you've created if you leave all of your assets to your kids equally. And people do it all the time. You know why? Because they don't want to think about it, right? They just don't want to think about it. Nobody wants to think about their demise. They just want to think, well, this is a good plan. And if you go to your average attorney, that is the plan they'll drag. If they're not an ag-specific attorney, they think 1/3 to everybody. That sounds like a great idea. Worst idea in the world. You might as well just give it all to the government, man. Because you know who you're giving it to? Me and my ilk. Because we're going to fight until we take all your money, and then we'll say, yeah, we're done, we'll settle now. And we keep all the money. And I hate that, because the farm's gone. You ever buy land in an estate sale? It's because the kids are fighting usually. Somebody doesn't want to go play well. So what you do to begin with, very simple, separate the operations from the land base. Any of your kids can inherit and be landlords, or get a dividend check or a rent check. They can all participate in the land base, right? You can figure that out. We can all figure that out pretty easily. And if you like them all, you're probably cool with that. Mom is, I promise you. Mom's like, yeah, let's treat the kids fairly, equally. They should all share in the land base. That's fine. But the operation side, only the on-farm heirs should ever inherit that. Again, do not force your kids to have those conversations. They will not go well. They have to hire people like me to unwind them. And judges know only one way to do that. Sell everything, pay the taxes, pay the attorneys, split the rest. They don't want to spend any more time than that even thinking about it. Sell it, split it, and the farm's gone. Happens over and over again. So separate those. If you do nothing else, there's one more thing that's more important at the end, but if you do nothing else, just separate the operations from the land base so that you can have a serious conversation about who should really be inheriting the operational side. And that gets into equal and fair aren't the same thing. I mean, that one that's come back to the farm, he's added a lot of value. He's making his off-farm heirs wealthy, to be honest with you, because he's adding a lot of value to that operational side. That's okay if he gets the operations. You can equal things up on the other side with some life insurance or, you know, retirement accounts or whatever. But absolutely do not have everybody being treated equally in that situation. So how do you lock in some of these strategies that are going to go away? So on the land-based side, because that's your biggest asset, and I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what the exemption is going to be when you die, and that's important. And I don't know what your land values are going to be. You know, they did a study in Indiana in general over the last 100 years, the 20th century. Average growth of land value over that 100 years was 7%. And that's taking in the 15 years of the Depression, the miserable 80s, but just year in, year out, the average growth was 7%. For the next 100 years, we're projecting 8%. Because of minerals, because of bio, you know, turbines, solar, because of, especially in Indiana, because of development, right? Your farm's probably eventually going to be near some development. So that's important. So they're expecting 8% growth. So again, just going to use a rough number. Let's say your land value is worth $10 million today. I can work in ones and zeros. You're sitting there going like, maybe I do or don't have an estate tax plan. $10 million is fine. You know what it's worth in 8 more years? $20 million. Because at 8% it's growing, it's doubling about every 8 years, right? So then in 16 years, and I think everybody in this room, their succession plan is not to die in the next 16 years. So in 16 years, it doesn't go 10, 20, 30, right? We're talking doubling, 10, 20, 40. When I go back and meet with my clients that I put these plans in place 30 years ago, they've doubled 2-3 times. And they're shocked. They're shocked. But it's happening. Remember when you said that, you know, $1,000 an acre ground wouldn't finance, wouldn't cash flow? Well, $15,000 an acre land doesn't finance and doesn't cash flow either. It doesn't keep you from buying it. And at some point your grandkids are going to say, why didn't you buy the whole state, Grandpa? My God, now it's $30,000 an acre. I mean, that's just where we're headed. There's a lot of money coming into this. It's not going to stay like this. I talked to people in the last couple of weeks say, I'm averaging, since COVID, I'm averaging 15% return on my land a year. That's going up that much. So it won't stay like that. But again, over a 100-year period, it is projected to average 8%. And I think that's actually a little low for Indiana, to be honest. Iowa certainly has been higher over the last 100 years. So we want to take that land base. I don't care if it's only worth, you pick the number. The estate tax exemption is a terrible reason to do succession planning, by the way, or estate tax planning. Again, nobody in this room, there's no politician you can call, and there's no clairvoyant that can tell you what the exemption is going to be when you pass away. So don't play that game. I don't know how you rest at night as you get older, thinking, well, I hope I stay under the exemption today, you know. No, you want your land to be as valuable as possible. Go for it. I mean, but seriously, you put this in this environment, in Indiana, it can grow for the next 100 years tax-free, state tax-free. The Rockefellers use some states that allow it to go on forever. I'm from Colorado. We allow these trusts to go on in perpetuity, so they can just go on. 100 years is enough for me, by the way. I don't think you need to do any planning for 1,000 years from now. So you think about that, though. You think about, that's doubling 12 times. So a $10 million farm is getting real close to $1 billion. You know, if it runs this, that's a hell of a legacy to leave to your kids. You know, people probably sleep a little knowing, well, I missed those ball games, some anniversaries. Yeah, I did some bad things, but I'm leaving them $1 billion. I feel pretty good about myself, right? That should make you feel pretty good. I mean, we're getting to the point where your kids will never be able to buy the land base that you guys have acquired. Just keeping it together is the important thing at this stage. They're going to get opportunities. Like I said, they're a little more, they're less controlled. Your kids are probably going to be less controlling, and they're certainly open to bringing people like me in to talk to them about those opportunities. The older generation is not open to that. They knew how to farm. They knew what their break-evens were. They knew how to do everything. Your kids watched that and said, yeah, I'm not doing that. No way, man. I might love driving the truck. I may like working even at the computer. But I'm not doing everything Dad did, because he was gone by 4 o'clock every morning. And he came home at midnight every night, and he usually was grumpy, right? So they're not doing that. They're hiring people like us to give them different opportunities. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. And so they're going to take advantage of that. There's going to be ways over the next generation to make this thing cash flow without just farming. And it's going to make their lives a little easier. But that's the legacy you can live there. But how do you lock that in then? And like I said, you put your land in the land entity, separated from the operations. In theory, you can discount it when you pass away, that 40%, so that helps a lot. What if they take that away? So that's when you turn around and you use that trust. So here's the dirty little secret. The IRS can always audit any return you ever filed for 3 years. So when you pass away, if you're anywhere near the exemption amount or over it, your estate has to be audited by the IRS. And I'm really expensive when your kids call me after you pass away and say, the IRS has audited me, help me get out of this. Because again, every dollar the IRS can say that value is higher and their regulations allow them, your kids have to give them 40% of that. So IRS fights really, really hard. And that 40% has only been in effect for the last 10 years. Our estate tax was always 55%. From 1916 until 2004, it was 55%. This is just a small gift of rolling it back to 40%. Again, Biden and Obama proposed going back to 45, incrementally up to 55%. So we will see those rates probably go back up, which means if you're over the exemption, and this rolls back in 22 months, if you're over the exemption of $5 million, if you're married, you get $10 million. If you're over that, you're working just as hard for the government as you are for your family. Because every day you get up and add value, you're adding half of it to the government, not to your family. So you have to put something in place. So these trusts that are allowed to use today, what we do is we make a small gift of the non-voting units of this entity, right? You have a land entity, separated, 1% voting, 99% non-voting. You keep the voting the rest of your life. That controls everything. That makes all the decisions. The 99% non-voting has no value. That's why you discount 40%. Because whoever owns that non-voting really doesn't have a say in anything. They don't have a right to cash flow. They don't have a right to make any decisions. You as a voting member keep all the decisions. So you don't mind moving some of that non-voting. And you move a small percentage into that trust through a gift. Because now we file a gift tax return and say to the IRS, we have 3 years from now to audit this estate tax plan. Not when they die. We got the statute running now. So good luck. You know, we're going to make a small gift. Today, between you and your wife, you have $27 million of exemption. If you make even $1 million gift and take 100% discount, they still can't make any money, right? I mean, that's cheating, but we wouldn't do that. But if you took a 40% discount on $1 million gift and the IRS came back and said, well, that should be 40% higher, we're going to say that gift was $1.8 million. Well, you still have $25 million left. Nobody's been writing any checks. So in our experience, the IRS will lay that in a corner somewhere and hope somebody else looks at it. And 3 years will go like that. And it never gets looked at, and when you pass away, your kids have no filing to do. Because you've already filed with the IRS, and we already got the statute running. Excellent. What do you do with the rest? We want to lock this in. Remember I said that the Attorney General said as long as you have a contract with this trust, they can't overturn these trusts. You sell the rest of that 99% on voting interest, you sell those to that trust. While you're alive, that trust is just you. So this is not a transaction. There's no tax, there's no anything. There's actually no reporting requirements. It's like giving something to your wife. Well, maybe none of you guys have ever done that. It's like giving, something to the church or something. It's not a really transaction. So when you sell, you create a contract under your state law, whether it's Illinois or Indiana. And now you have a contract, and the Supreme Court has not overturned any state's contract for over 100 years. And that's why Obama and Biden's Attorney General said, well, if they have a contract, you can't go back and undo these trusts. So that's how you lock in your legacy estate plan that now creates an estate plan for your kids and grandkids. Well, it can go on 100 years. As long as that land stays in that entity inside that trust, they don't have to do any estate planning either. And here's the other good news. Every single one of your children, including you younger guys and girls, you all should have prenuptial agreements. Because you don't want to lose half the farm to an ex-spouse. So all of you should have prenuptial agreements. That's what these trusts are. Your parents have just created a prenuptial agreement for you. Because the in-laws, the ex-laws, whatever you want to call them, will never be a beneficiary of these trusts. So when these trusts first came out years ago, I had to litigate these in almost all 50 states. And the judge looks at that and said, well, that ex-spouse isn't even a beneficiary. She doesn't have a right to anything, or he doesn't have a right to anything. And in the old days, I watched farmers have to farm with their ex-son-in-laws because they got half, because they gifted land or assets to their daughter. I mean, a lot of attorneys who don't know better with ag said, yeah, just start gifting assets away. That's a good idea. No, it's not. Because whatever you gift away to your kids, they can lose really easily, So don't ever do that. Not with the land base. In this trust environment, these are prenuptial agreements for your kids and grandkids. Not for you, right? Still wake up every morning saying you're sorry. I mean, try to fake sincerity, but honestly, guys, just wake up and say you're sorry. And you know, you're going to do something that day to irritate your wife, 100%. So just, I mean, best estate, that's the second best estate plan you could ever have, is making your wife very happy. Starting out with half of what you had is never any fun, right? And they still tell us that 50% of marriages end in divorce, and that's true with farmers, they say too. 50%. Yeah. The nice thing about this is, in this environment, your kids are protected also. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't give your wife any incentive to kill you off right away. Because what that trust usually says, because they think about it, they really do, right? They see you in the morning snoring and that pillow comes real close to getting over your face. Just know that's happening almost every morning. But by putting it in this trust, it lays out the terms, basically saying when you pass away, if your wife remarries, and she'll probably bring someone to your funeral, to be honest with you, but if your wife remarries and has kids, they don't inherit this. This is for your kids that you have with your current wife. So it really is a protective cocoon, and I've seen it work for generations, and it's really, really impressive how that works. So when you want to do something creative, that's usually what we recommend, but you always start out with a revocable trust, right? You always want to have that revocable trust in place to avoid probate, to avoid the public, to avoid the expense. It's just let your kids go grieve when you die. You don't want them going through the headache of hiring attorneys and accountants and different things like that and fighting with the IRS for 2 years. Because the IRS rules basically say if you owe estate tax, you got to pay it within 9 months. So if you have some off-farm heirs, they're going to say, start selling land. If you have on-farm heirs, they're going to say, well, we're going to have to borrow money. And they're going to start fighting about that too. So it's very important to eliminate the estate tax because it solves one argument that your kids will never have to have. And if I'm not here to sell life insurance. If you want life insurance, I'll sell it to you because it's not a good investment. Especially as you get older, you can never have enough, right? But that's how some people have solved their estate tax problem, especially as that exemption was really low in the 90s and early 2000s. People went out and bought a lot of life insurance. And that's fine. That's your right answer for you. But you probably don't have enough now. You don't. And here's the problem with Illinois, is they have their own estate tax system, right? And they started a $4 million exemption. They don't start at the 5 or the 13, and it's $4 million. It's been $4 million for a long time. Every year the Republicans say they're going to raise it, they're going to marry it to the federal system, and every year the Democrats in Illinois say, no, we're going to lower it. We're going to go back to $2 million, and neither one does anything. It just stays there. So sadly, the people in Chicago vote a lot more than the farmers. There's a lot more people in Chicago than out on the rural farm, and they don't give a rat's ass about you. So I don't see that going back anytime soon. I mean, Illinois has, if you've driven the streets of Illinois, they need to raise money. So yeah, I don't have any good answers for you other than you need to do estate planning even more than everybody else in this room. The problem with that $4 million is it's not portable. And here's what I mean by that is at the federal level, the other reason revocable trusts were very, very important is a lot of the assets were just in dad's name. Maybe the land was co-owned by mom and dad, but if you created an entity, it's usually dad that owned it, and he certainly owned all the operational assets. Well, if mom died first, and she didn't have enough assets in her name, you didn't get to use the whole exemption. Unless you had a revocable trust that said, hey, mom, if you die and don't have enough assets, whatever's left of the federal exemption that you didn't use, it pours over to the trust, and dad can use it when he passes away. So under Bush, I think it was about 2007, Congress finally said, you know what, we're going to just allow that at the federal level. You don't have to create a revocable trust to make that happen. We still recommend it because what Congress gives it, they can take it away. None of these laws are permanent. So what Congress basically said is, if somebody dies first and they don't have enough assets to use the whole exemption, the rest of that exemption pours over to the surviving spouse. That's a great answer, right? That's great. It doesn't happen in Illinois. Illinois says specifically, if mom dies first and she doesn't have $4 million of assets, it's just gone. You only get $4 million after that. You don't get mom's whatever she didn't use. So in Illinois, it's very important to title assets properly. And it's a fallacy that the exemption's $4 million in Illinois. It is if you're under that. But if you're over $4 million, it goes back to $60,000 and starts taxing you there. So by the time you get to the $4 million mark, you already owe $1 million to Illinois. So it's a tough system. Minnesota's a little friendlier, but it has a lower exemption of $3 million. Oregon's a bitch, man. The exemption's $1 million in Oregon. I meet a lot of younger kids in Oregon saying, I'm not coming back to farm because I'm going to have to sell everything to pay Oregon and federal tax. And I'm like, no, there's a solution. There's a solution. So I don't know what you're worth, but I've had to deal with farm landlords that have owned over $500 million of land, and we've been able to eliminate their estate tax. You got to get awful creative, because you can only discount probably 40%, so that's not the way to do it. But you can do some other creative things with those things. But certainly talk to your accountant, your attorney about these trusts, about discounting, and try to lock them in sooner than later. I talk to a lot of attorneys around the world, and they're already starting to say they're not going to take on a lot more new clients for estate planning. People are rushing to attorneys right now to get started because they see this train coming down the track of going back to $5 million. Appraisers are even harder to get a hold of. Again, they're swamped. They tend to be more swamped in the fall, but I'm seeing it year-round now because there's just a lot more estate planning going on with the scare that's coming. Again, the politicians aren't talking about it, which scares people even more, because we don't know where Mr. Trump and or Mr. Biden are going to stake themselves out on this. And there's certainly a chance that we could finally have a contested convention again. We haven't had one since 1968 with the Democrats. It's always been the caucuses and the primaries that have decided who's running. That could change this year. 60% of the country doesn't want either one of these guys running. So it's going to be interesting to see if when they go to convention, if they just open it up to a delegate vote and let them decide in the convention who should be the next candidate for the Republicans. Yeah, the younger people in this room have never even heard that that was even a possibility. But all officials for president were elected, or I guess, yeah, they were put on the ticket that way. It was always through the convention up until early 60s. So we might go back to that for 1 year. It's going to be an interesting year. Enjoy the Olympics. Don't worry about you're going to hear a lot of noise about the election and stuff. Don't worry about that too much. One other thing I want to cover real quick, and then I'll open it up for questions, is if you're doing proper income tax planning, meaning the people in this room have the ability to use the cash method of accounting, right? Nobody else does. Only farmers and oil and gas people get to use the cash method of accounting. Trump didn't understand that in 2017. He tried to put everybody on the accrual method, and we have a legislative branch in our firm, and we got to Washington really quick and sat down with the people at the top and said, you can't do that to farmers. And you guys still hear about this, because the tax system would be much easier. We could make the tax code much smaller if everybody was on the accrual method of accounting. But that's one of the great benefits you guys have, and I don't see it ending anytime soon, is you get to be on the cash method of accounting, which means when you make prepayments for the next year, you get to deduct it. Which means if you don't sell your grain until January 1st, you don't recognize the income. It's a great system, and you should abuse that. You should. My conversation with you is, what do you want to pay in income tax? And we'll make that work. The only other person that has a say in that is your banker, right? Your banker's like, don't have your tax return be broke every year. I can't sell I can't sell the loan department on giving you any more money. So your banker will want you to show some income. And the brackets are very low right now, so you should pay some income tax. But you should determine what your income tax. With those rules in place, you should get to determine what your income tax is. You really should. And when we set up that land entity, we put it on a November year end, which means December 1st, you prepay rent to it and write that off. It's not income to that entity until next year. So instead of paying for hydrous or fuel or paint you don't want, you pay yourself. Take money from one pocket, put it in the other, write it off. Just keep doing that. When you pass away or retire, that's when the deferral might catch up with you. But that gives you an opportunity to do some tax planning every year by yourself. Relieving that headache, this is what wives tell me too, is my husband's not in the den playing with his books, determining what he has to spend money on, during Christmas Eve. Because you can make that decision December 1st, you're done. You can enjoy the holidays then. So it does relieve a little bit of stress. The other thing that we like to tell people is, if you keep using that system, and you should, because it's only available, like I said, to farmers and oil people, is if you're smart enough, you'll realize the only way out of this is to die, right? There's no good exit strategy, because the year you retire, your tax bill is going to be extreme if you've been pushing properly. That doesn't have to be true. We have developed a strategy for that. And as long as you create a general partnership for your operational side, that general partnership can be sold to the next generation as they come in, and you can set that up over a long-term note and defer that last get-out-of-jail-free card for a much longer period of time. And the beauty is your kids get that step up in basis on everything in there. They can literally turn around and sell the grain. Let's say it's $6 million. They can sell it no tax at all. And you didn't have to die to do it. The only way to really do that, the only way you've ever heard to do that is to die. It's not true.
You can use a partnership rules under 754 to get that step up in basis. We use this with dads that want to go buy land. I mean, as long as we change the ownership a little bit, you can get that step up in basis. Now you have $6 million, whatever the number is. Don't pay any tax that year. So it's all cash. You can go out and buy a farm. And then you pay that tax slowly over the next 20 years. Hopefully at lower rates because you keep your income. Because you start the game all over again, right? You start the game all over again. So there's some creative ways. I don't hear of any other firms that are talking about that. If there was an IRS agent in the room, I wouldn't be talking about it. I read a lot of articles. I don't write articles on that. We only work with certain people to do that because the IRS hates that rule. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's Code Section 754. It's a partnership strategy for getting a step up in basis. Partnerships are allowed to step up their basis when somebody else comes in. So it's a real opportunity to get out of that push if it's getting painful. If you're starting to buy paint you don't need, let's talk. Because that's not a good investment strategy, obviously. So I got 3 minutes for questions.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
Why don't they just come out and tell us if Trump is incarcerated and he can still be president?
He can be. Yes. So in 1920, a man was in jail and ran for president. He didn't win, clearly, but we don't have a statute that says that if you're a felon, you can't run for. You have to be a certain age and you have to be a citizen. That's it. Certain age and a citizen. Pretty low standards, right? I'm pretty sure you can have dementia and run for president. So be on life support. You can be in jail. You can be in jail. Yep. And I think to some degree the courts want us to decide it. It's clear they want to delay this. I mean, I know a lot of people were upset about that this is getting delayed, and I'm from Colorado. I thought it was a shock that we said Trump couldn't be on the primary ballot. They overruled that, or they haven't decided on it, so he is on our ballot. His name, I just got it in the mail. They want the people to decide this. They really, which flies in the face of the Supreme Court did decide the 2000 election, by the way, and they did it quickly. But they really want to stay out of this one, so they're going to try to delay. He's probably one of the trials. The civil trials will go forward. This guy's going to owe a lot of money, but you guys that are happy enough to contribute to his to his party are certainly paying his bills, his attorney bills. And I think he's selling shoes now, right? I don't see any Trump shoes, but I think they're $300 or whatever. So that's helping to pay his attorney bills. I think one of the trials will probably move forward. I don't know if it'll get finalized in time, though. I really don't. It's not going to change the people that love him anyway, and that's fine. I think the courts have kind of made up their mind. They want the people to make this decision. If he's in, that's what we decided. If he's out, that's what we decided. But it's going to be a tough year. I mean, it was a lot tougher during the Civil War period, though. When people say this is the worst it's ever been, not even close. If people are old enough to remember the 60s had some very Kennedy did not win the popular vote. Nixon just wrote he said, I'm not going to fight this. Nixon was a gentleman in 1960. It's the last time he was a gentleman, but he was a gentleman in 1960. So, we've had a lot of presidential elections that were very contested. So, don't get too excited. Enjoy the Olympics. Enjoy your family. Enjoy your farm. This is just part of what we go through as a country. And it's always been divided like that. If you go back and read, half the country wanted to fight the Revolutionary War, and the other half were loyal to Britain. I mean, it was literally split down the middle like that. So this is who we are. We're rebels, man. We're not as bad as Australia, but we like revolting. We did it. Yeah. Good question. Anything else? Yes.
So you get a step up in basis.
I hate when you ask that question. Because you know what that's a leading question. So you don't get a step up in basis of the land, right? That's the price you pay. Is if you put it in that trust, it doesn't go through the estate tax system. So you don't get the step up in basis on the land. Why do you care if you get a step up in basis on the land? Because you want to sell it? Okay, because your dad doesn't want you to sell it, so the step up in basis doesn't do you any good, right? So that's why we don't put the depreciable assets in the grain in there, because we want that step up in basis so when dad dies, we get to redepreciate, we get to sell the grain for free. But the land, unless you're selling it, step up in basis has no value at all. Like the bins will keep out so you can redepreciate them, buildings. But the land itself, part of dad's plan is please do not sell this land. So this is helping not to sell the land. Again, estate tax is 40%, usually 55%. What's capital gains tax if you sell the land? 20%. Capital gains tax is always half of the estate tax. So again, better decision to sell it and not have to step up in basis than to pay estate tax. When you sell the land, if you decide to sell the land afterwards without the step up in basis, you're getting back money, right? You're selling it and getting back money. You have money to pay for that tax. When dad dies, how are you going to pay the tax? You got to sell land. So it's a vicious cycle. Again, I've been doing this for 20-some years. I've never had a beneficiary. We've had a lot of mom and dad's grandparents pass away. I've never had a beneficiary, and they've come to me and said, I want to get out. So that's the other important thing. Make sure there's buy-sells. I said there's two more important things here. Make sure you have buy-sells. Somebody is eventually going to want out of your land entity or your operating entity. Give them the rules to do it. If not, they have to come to me, and we got to go to court, and now we're selling assets, and we're paying tax. So buy-sells with every, and that's why I like entities, because they need to have buy-sell agreements for how to get people out of these operations if they don't want to stick around. If they want to move off to Timbuktu, they need to know how they get out. And it's usually with a big haircut, meaning a discount, and out over time. Operations will fund you getting out. I'm not going and getting a loan. You'll get bought out at 40% discount over a 20-year period. You really want out now? Because mom and dad wanted you to stay in. And some people do want to get out. But the other thing, when beneficiaries come to me and they say, you know what, I want out. I'm going to sell. I want to get out. What do you want? Do you want to sell out, or do you want to sell the underlying asset? Yeah, I want to sell the land. Okay. What do you want to do? I want to buy a house or a commercial building, whatever they want to. They want to. If they want to get a Ferrari, you pay the price, man. But if they want to turn it into a different investment, they're not into ag, they're not into farming. Do a like-kind exchange. There's no tax. 99% of my beneficiaries that went out, we just do a like-kind exchange. Absolutely. I've never had a beneficiary pay tax.
So you said these idiots are likely, if a certain branch of government got total control, they're probably not going to be pro.
Grandfather in or what?
Well, they couldn't go back and do retroactive changes to the
Supreme Court would allow it.
What about gifts? If gifts
So there's no contract with a gift, right? A gift is I'm just giving it up. I'm just giving you something. There's no contract there. There's no quid pro quo, as attorneys use. So it's just, if it's just the gift, if you don't do the sale piece, there's an argument they can undo your trust. Exactly. So a lot of attorneys in the past have just said, make gifts, gift. Not in ag, you never want to do that. But here's another reason why you just don't do the gift part, is we need that contract. So that if they try to do away with these trusts, they can't undo the trusts that are already put in place. Yeah, very good. Yep. And somebody that's not an ag attorney is not going to get that. They're just, if you own Microsoft stock, just gift it away. That's, and I get that. That's fine. But in ag, no. You can't, because you're giving up control, cash flow, and now you don't have that contractual piece. So, yeah.
Great question.
You could potentially sell part of your land to whoever you're gifting the balance to so the gifting parents, let's say, still maintain some cash.
That's why we do the contract piece too. Great question. So the other reason we do the contract piece is if you gift it away, you've given up cash flow and control, right? But not with these trusts. But you have given up the part that's not yours anymore. By doing the sale piece, this contract creates cash flow back to who sold it, right? So that's how we keep all of the cash coming back to you. And this is another thing the attorneys don't understand is no farm cash flows. Now do this on top of it, it really doesn't cash flow. I agree, we got to get creative. But that sale piece guarantees not only do you stay in control, but you keep all the cash flow coming back to you. Because this is your retirement plan eventually. You'll give up the land eventually when you die, right? So all the cash flow has to come back to you while you're alive. You'll decide when you want to turn it off. But yeah, great question. That's the other part of the contract, is keeping the cash flow coming back to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, so that they're the ones benefiting and they're not giving up that cash flow. Yeah. Now, if rent goes way high and they don't need it anymore, their lifestyle gets easier, then they can slowly start gifting it to the kids. Absolutely. But no, I would never suggest that to any farmer that he gives up control or cash flow. Yeah. Absolutely. Good questions. And for farmers that say, hey, if I live in Illinois, if I move to Florida, Texas, South Dakota, I don't have to pay a state tax, or the Illinois state tax anymore, right? I get that question a lot, is I'll just move out of the state so I don't have to pay the tax anymore. And that works if you take your land with you. So wherever you move to, take your land with you, and you won't have to pay Illinois state tax. Yeah. As long as you don't have real property in that state, they can't attach it. So that's the key, is they can attach things. So real property they can put a lien on. But if you move out of the state and don't have any real property, I mean, there's a lot of people that move to other states that don't have, you know, they aren't farmers and they don't pay Illinois state tax anymore. So you can't have real property back in the state because they can attach it. Yeah. Yeah. Same with it. Look, if you buy a farm in Minnesota and you live in Indiana, Indiana doesn't have an estate tax. But Minnesota is going to attach your Minnesota property because they do have an estate tax. So those are the things you have to always be cognitive of is the real property can be taxed in the state where the real property is situated. So, yeah. Because I do get that question. I'm going to buy property in Washington. I'm going to buy property in Oregon. Sounds good because those are nice states to visit. But they have low estate tax exemptions. So you don't want to own a lot of property there. Yeah. I'm just going to do your plan for you right here, okay? We'll just do it. No. Go ahead.
Let's get to the cost.
Do I need to let the next speaker? I'm going to stick around through a few breaks. I can't make it the whole way through lunch, but I will stick around. So yeah, let's talk that all through. Absolutely, because I don't want to use up the next. No. Watch me sneak out. I'm going to the restroom. Sure. Thank you very much, by the way. Thank you.